My guest at this time is Mallory Quigley. She is the Vice President of Communications at the Susan B. Anthony List. She joins me today just a little bit ahead of the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C., and by the time most folks hear this, the march will be concluded. But there's an important theme of the march this year, and it's also important to talk to Mallory about where the abortion debate is going over the next couple of years, as now there's divided government once again in Washington. And Mallory, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Greg, for having me.
Well, let's first of all talk about the march. Big event in the pro-life movement every year. Usually gets undercovered quite a bit by the mainstream media. But tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people will be in Washington today to march. And the theme this year is pro-life is pro-science. There's a different theme each year. I don't know if it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, where it was pro-life is pro-woman and so forth. So talk about why there's a major focus on why pro-life is pro-science this year.
There's been a lot of current affairs that have just sort of been swirling. You know, there's been this debate over fetal tissue research, and we see that the abortion lobby is still using this term blob of cells to describe what's happening in what is living in the womb during a woman's pregnancy. There was a recent video where an abortion advocate was really bullying kids into supporting her decision to have had an abortion, and she sort of used a lot of that language. So I think that we're really focused on drawing out the fact that from the moment of sperm-egg fusion and those cells begin to divide, that we have a person there. It's a very small one, but it's a person nonetheless, and that he or she's her DNA is there. It's separate from his or her mom. You know, baby can sometimes have a separate blood type. If it's a little boy, it's a completely separate gender. And so the unborn child is completely different from, you know, your appendix that's rupturing that needs to be removed. It's a separate person that just needs time, nourishment, and a safe place to grow. And that's just a scientific reality. And I think sort of examining the fact that every person is unrepeatable, and that no one is quite alike. We really are all snowflakes, I guess. This is just like a really beautiful message of the sanctity of every human life, and the fact that science backs that up.
Mallory, what you just articulated seems to be the belief and the scientific foundation for what most pro-life people believe. But for those on the pro-choice side, there is some differences on that, clearly. We have New York Governor Andrew Cuomo now suggesting that he wants to protect abortion literally up until the moment of birth. So as far as you can tell on the pro-choice side, when do they really think life begins? Is it actually at birth? Because at other times they support legislation to protect unborn children. If the mother is murdered and the child is murdered too, they seem to usually get on board with that. So where do they actually think life begins?
Well, it really draws out the disconnect that you are referencing there. I think that over time, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has gotten worse on this issue. You know, they don't talk about abortion being safe, legal, and rare anymore. In fact, that language has been stripped from the party platform. Now they talk about abortion being accessible without limits, in fact, paid for at the taxpayer's expense. And they're even advocating to have non-doctors perform abortions and to make the abortion pill available. There's a group right now from India that is sending, well, they're not from India, but the pills are coming from India and other places, abortion drugs that are being sent illegally to women in the United States, completely skirting the FDA regulations on this. The abortion drugs are very dangerous, and so they're completely going outside of FDA protocol by mailing these things directly at home to women. There's no quality control, and certainly women are left to deal with the consequences of this abortion procedure at their home, not in a anywhere near doctors in case there's complications, et cetera. So the pro-abortion left is unfortunately just moved so far extreme. I mean, Cecile Richards, though, she said it herself, to answer your first question, she said it herself in an interview a few years back that she became a mother when she gave birth. So I suppose she just kind of ignored, her baby bump for 9 months. But yeah, when she gave birth, that's when she became a mom. And I suppose that's when she thinks that her children turned into people. But it is unscientific, absolutely, and it's inhumane, and it's ideological before anything else.
Well, and that's certainly the perspective we hear a lot from the pro-choice community. But as we said, sometimes they do support legislation when it comes to others harming an unborn child, leading some in the pro-life community certainly to suggest that really from a pro-choice perspective, it all boils down to whether a child is wanted. If it's wanted, it's a person. If it's not wanted, it's not.
I think that's exactly it. Wantedness is the determining factor for the abortion lobby. And we just see how they think that there's too many people. There was a huge story in the New York Times just before Christmas about Planned Parenthood, the way that they treat their own pregnant employees. So even their employees may want babies, but the organization itself clearly doesn't want them. They pressure their own employees into abortion and really bully them when they try and take time for themselves and for their children. So absolutely, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Greg.
All right, let's get into the politics now, Mallory. And before we get to the new Congress, let's talk about the old one. It's not too often that you get a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. And I know the major goal for Susan B. Anthony List and a lot of other pro-lifers in that 2 years was to end federal funding, or at least radically reduce federal funding for Planned Parenthood. It didn't happen. Why didn't it happen?
The bottom line is that we had a Republican majority in the Senate, but we did not have a pro-life majority in the U.S. Senate. Just like pro-life Democrats have become an endangered species, pro-abortion Republicans are dwindling, but there are still a few in the U.S. Senate, and we didn't have the votes that we needed. We were very close. In fact, a provision to defund Planned Parenthood was included in the reconciliation bill that would have repealed Obamacare that we were very close to passing. In fact, the defunding Planned Parenthood provision was completely non-controversial, except to, maybe Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, but it was included in the bill the entire time. It made it past the parliamentarians' scrutiny, because reconciliation has really been the only way that we can move forward on this, because it only requires 51 votes, whereas all the other bills, like the Pain Capable bill, for example, will require 60 votes to pass. So we were very close. It was incredibly disappointing and disheartening when Senator McCain switched his vote at the last minute. It came as a surprise to everyone with, the vice president was there waiting in the wings, ready to break the tie in favor of the repeal bill, which would have defunded Planned Parenthood as well. And it was really, after that, we lost a seat in Alabama, and at that point, we had still a Republican majority, but not a pro-life majority. And that's sort of the Reader's Digest version of the story there. It's been incredibly disheartening for sure. The good news is that President Trump has really picked up the baton where Congress has failed. One thing Congress did do was pass that CRA repealing Obama-era regulations to force states to fund Planned Parenthood through Title X. So a congressional review act that you signed up earlier on gave the states the flexibility to do that. He also issued the Protect Life Rule, which are these new Title X regulations. When that is finalized, which we expect it to be soon, Planned Parenthood stands to lose up to $60 million. It's their second largest source of federal funding. It's not the biggest, but it would be a huge win for our movement. But really, that Medicaid funding is still the biggest chunk of change. And I had to just agree that it was surprising and discouraging when it didn't happen.
Now, of course, Mallory, we have a divided government. The Democrats control the House. There's a strong pro-choice sentiment, certainly within that Democratic caucus, making it pretty unlikely that much is going to get done legislatively that would be beneficial to the pro-life cause. How are you looking at the next 2 years?
One thing that we know for sure will continue is the confirmation of judges in the Senate. And Leader McConnell has been very resolute about that. And I heard him say recently that the Senate's going to have plenty of time, since they probably won't be considering many of the bills that the House moves forward because it's just led by such a radical pro-abortion woman. And, of course, this new caucus is just very incredibly liberal and pro-abortion. On the very first day of the new Congress, Speaker Pelosi sort of made her priorities known in including in that spending bill language to undo President Trump's global Protect Life policy, which is the expanded Mexico City policy to stop taxpayer funding of abortion overseas. So we do know that it's going to be a defensive battle for the duration of these next 2 years. You know, there's more than a dozen pro-life riders that stop taxpayer funding of abortion here at home, and we've got to fight for those riders every time. So we're going to be playing defense in the House, but fortunately the Senate is looking like they're committed to being a brick wall against the pro-abortion antics of the House.
Let's finish where we began, Mallory, the March for Life. For those who have never been to a March for Life, how would you describe the mood, who makes up this large crowd that comes each year, and what your thoughts about the future are in terms of where this debate's going?
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to get out there later today. There are student groups that have come from high schools and colleges all across America, church groups. There's always a lot of young people, a lot of babies, parents and families braving the cold. Although I think we're expecting a sunny day later. It's very joyful. It's a very family-friendly event, and it's really just a beautiful experience. So for people that have never been, I would encourage them to come again next year because the March's days are numbered because we will be successful in this country, and I think we will see a day soon when all unborn children are welcomed and protected under the law. That's the scientific thing to do, and it's the right thing to do, and it's on its way.
Mallory, we'll let you get to it. Thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Have a great day.
You too. Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications at the Susan B. Anthony List. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America. Belief in the scientific foundation for what most pro-life people believe. But for those on the pro-choice side,